While one can make the argument that the 2021 NBA playoffs is truly an anomaly, the fact of the matter is injuries have affected the outcome of almost every single year. And today I want to cover some of the biggest injuries of this decade and the effects that it's had on the NBA landscape. And if this is a series you guys would like me to continue, go ahead and hit that sub button, man. Leave a like, go crazy. The 2010 NBA Finals to this day is still one of the most memorable NBA championships ever. It's the Boston Celtics versus the Los Angeles Lakers. It's a rematch of the last two NBA champions, and it ended up being Kobe Bryant's fifth and last NBA championship. Though for the people who weren't there to watch the series, Celtics starting center Kendrick Perkins suffered a knee injury in the first quarter of Game 6, which inevitably sidelined him for the rest of the series. Now, before Kendrick Perkins became one of ESPN's brightest analysts, he was actually a pivotal part to one of the best teams in the league in the late 2000s, as he provided the Big Three Boston Celtics with toughness and interior presence, aspects that they desperately needed against the Lakers, who themselves had Andrew Bynum and Pau Gasol down below. Many Celtics fans believe that if Kendrick Perkins was healthy in Game 6 and in Game 7, Kendrick Perkins would have had a big enough effect on one of those games, which would therefore change the winner of the series, as going into Game 6, the Boston Celtics were up 3-2 and just needed one more win to win it. But the reality is, despite all of the major players playing in the series, this series was actually way more injury riddled than we want to remember. Andrew Bynum was on minutes restrictions this whole series, only playing 25 minutes a game, to the point where he told Phil Jackson in the third quarter of Game 6 to take him out because he just couldn't run. Rondo had stitches after getting elbowed by Ron Artest, Kobe Bryant was supposedly suffering through knee pains as well as an arthritic knuckle, and Kevin Garnett was never truly the same after his knee injury in 2009. Who knows what this series really would have been if everyone was truly healthy. Derrick Rose in the 2010-2011 season became the youngest player in league history to win the MVP award. And while the Chicago Bulls were eliminated in the Eastern Conference Finals that year by the Miami Heat, this year was only supposed to mark the beginning of Derrick Rose's career. However, in the first round of the 2012 NBA playoffs, Derrick Rose would end up tearing his ACL, missing the rest of the playoffs and the entirety of the next season. What hurt the most was in 2012, despite Rose already not having a healthy regular season, the Chicago Bulls still ended the season with the best record in the league, along with a top 5 offense and defense in the league. However, Derrick Rose would then suffer even more injuries in the next couple of years that would truly sideline his potential superstar career. While as fans, we do give the benefit of the doubt to the Heat and speculate that if D Rose was healthy, that the Heat probably would have still made it to the finals. That's all it is. They probably. And the fact of the matter is, the Miami Heat's #1 competition in the Eastern Conference only had their best player healthy in the playoffs for 1 year during that era. The 2013 NBA season, looking back, was actually much more injury riddled than we remember. As mentioned, Derrick Rose was sidelined for the whole season, but out west, the newly formed LA Lakers with Kobe Bryant, Dwight Howard, and Steve Nash were by far the most injury riddled team in the league that season. Steve Nash missed 32 games, Pau Gasol missed 33, Steve Blake missed 37, Dwight Howard was recovering from a torn labrum the whole season, and as we all remember, Kobe Bryant ruptured his Achilles in the last 10 games of the season. While yes, there were chemistry issues with this team, they weren't even given a chance to fix those chemistry issues because everyone was dropping like flies. This was one of the most stacked teams in NBA history that wasn't able to show what they got, and due to their failure of a season, broke up after just 1 year. After making it to the NBA Finals the year prior, and after trading James Harden, the Oklahoma City Thunder were looking to build on last year's success, and they did a phenomenal job of doing so in the regular season, ending the season with the best record in the Western Conference, second best in the league at 60-22, while having the best offense and the 4th best defense in the league. The Oklahoma City Thunder were a big threat going into the NBA playoffs and were honestly favored to come out of the Western Conference for a second straight year. But in the very first round, Russell Westbrook would tear his meniscus after colliding with Patrick Beverley, which would then cause him to miss the rest of the playoffs and a big portion of the upcoming season as well. Because of this injury, the Oklahoma City Thunder would only make it as far as the second round, being eliminated by the Memphis Grizzlies. However, with every game this series being decided by no more than 6 points, one could easily make the case that the Thunder would have at least made it back to the Western Conference Finals if Russell Westbrook never got injured. The 2014 NBA season, for the most part, was actually one of the more healthy seasons of the decade, with the biggest injury, unfortunately, being Derrick Rose once again, who ended up tearing his meniscus after just coming back from his ACL tear. While there weren't any major injuries aside from D Rose's this year, there were a lot of nagging injuries and injuries from previous years that clearly had an effect on this season. Dwight Howard still didn't look completely the same. Kobe was pretty much out for the whole season. The Chicago Bulls again were left without Derrick Rose, and Russell Westbrook spent a big portion of this season recovering from his injury from the last year's playoffs. Nevertheless though, this is still one of the more healthy seasons of the decade along with the 2011 season. The 2015 season marked the come-out party of Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors as they won a league-best 67 games, and Steph Curry ended up capturing his first MVP. But as Russell Westbrook finally had a relatively healthy season, it would now be Kevin Durant, who missed the majority of the season due to a leg injury. Also in the summer going into this season, Paul George would suffer one of the most gruesome injuries in league history. Mind you, the Indiana Pacers were just coming from one of their best seasons in franchise history, making it to the Eastern Conference Finals, having the best record in the conference as well, with Paul George leading that way, and all of a sudden Paul George is just gone. And then we go into the playoffs where Kevin Love would get injured in the first round after Kelly Olynyk just tried to pull his shoulder out. And then in the finals, Kyrie Irving would suffer a knee injury late in game 1 that would sideline him for the rest of the series, leaving LeBron James without his two best players. Yet despite that, still pushed the Warriors to 6 games. While this series, in my opinion, would still have been competitive if Kyrie and Kevin Love were there, and as the next season's final showed, it's not like the Warriors are incapable of winning games if Kyrie and Kevin Love are healthy, we still will never truly know what the 2015 NBA Finals would have been if the Cavs were fully healthy. And speaking of the 2016 NBA Finals, let's go ahead and just fast forward straight to it. And in comparison to the 2015 NBA Finals, in 2016, it's almost like the roles were switched. It is now the Cleveland Cavaliers that are healthy for this series. It is now the Golden State Warriors who suffered through a major injury, as Andrew Bogut sat out the rest of the series after the first half of Game 5, where he suffered a knee injury. Now, for those who don't remember the pre-KD Warriors, Andrew Bogut was the Warriors' primary rim protector. And going up against the Cleveland Cavaliers, a team that has two of the best finishers of all time in Kyrie Irving and LeBron James, that presence was definitely missed. To the point where, again, one can argue that it changed the series. Not to mention Draymond Green's suspension and the theory that Stephen Curry wasn't even 100% healthy in this series. In 2017, the league had one goal, and that was to stop the Golden State Warriors. And in the 2017 playoffs, Kawhi Leonard was playing so well that he was really making a case for being the best player in the league. On top of his suffocating defense, Kawhi Leonard in the first 2 rounds was averaging 28 points, 8 rebounds and 5 assists on 52, 47, 92 splits. And in game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, Kawhi Leonard already had 26 points with 8 minutes left in the third quarter, while the San Antonio Spurs had a 20-plus point lead on this team. This injury would end up sidelining Kawhi Leonard for the rest of the series, and has left a lot of people doubting what would have happened if Kawhi never got injured. Many have theorized that the San Antonio Spurs would have won Game 1, but not necessarily the rest of the series, while others believe that if Kawhi was healthy, the Spurs would have just flat out won the series. On the other side of the bracket in the Eastern Conference, Isaiah Thomas was extremely hobbled leading up to the Eastern Conference battle against the Cleveland Cavaliers, but his injury would honestly play a bigger part in the next season, as many people had the Cleveland Cavaliers beating the Boston Celtics even with a fully healthy Isaiah Thomas, but I figured it was still worth mentioning in this video. So as I alluded to just now, the Isaiah Thomas injury would be more pivotal in the 2018 NBA season. The reason being is that Kyrie Irving wanted out of Cleveland for reasons that are still not 100% concrete to this day. And so the Boston Celtics and the Cleveland Cavaliers struck a deal that would send Kyrie Irving to the Boston Celtics in exchange for Isaiah Thomas, Jay Crowder, a Brooklyn Nets pick that would end up being Colin Sexton, along with other pieces. The Cavs wanted a short-term Kyrie replacement as they wanted to entice LeBron James to stay past this year, but Isaiah Thomas's injury ended up being much more serious than everyone expected, and he, if anything, became a scapegoat for this team because of how bad he was playing. He would then get traded to the Los Angeles Lakers at the trade deadline, but who knows how good the Cavs actually would have been if Isaiah Thomas was 100% healthy. On the other side of the trade were the Boston Celtics, who have a newly formed big three of Kyrie Irving, Gordon Hayward and Al Horford, along with one of the best young coaches in the league in Brad Stevens, and really good young pieces in Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, and Marcus Smart. And in the very first game of this season, against the Cavs mind you, Gordon Hayward would suffer one of the most gruesome injuries in league history, sidelining him for obviously the rest of the season. But to everyone's surprise, this wouldn't slow down the Boston Celtics one bit, as they would go on a 16-game winning streak after losing the first 2 games of the season, also going 20-3 in this stretch. The Boston Celtics were looking scary. However, late in the season, Kyrie Irving would suffer through a knee injury that would sideline him for the rest of the season. But to everyone's surprise again, the Boston Celtics would overachieve once more, making it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals without their 2 best players and came 1 win shy of an NBA Finals appearance. Now, some people have used the Boston Celtics playoff successes here as an argument as to how the Celtics played better without Kyrie and why they were better off without Kyrie, but the reality is they actually were better with Kyrie. And if Kyrie alone was healthy, there is a good chance that they would have made it to the NBA Finals, but nonetheless, again, we will never know. Either way, they probably would have lost to the Warriors, but again, we'll never know. In the following season, the Celtics would end up imploding, with the effects of the prior season's injuries playing a huge role in that. Also in this season, LeBron would suffer through a groin injury on Christmas Day that would cause him to have one of his least healthiest seasons. Now, no one really thought that the Los Angeles Lakers were going to win the whole thing that year. However, there's a huge possibility that if LeBron was healthy, they would have at least made the playoffs, a feat that they were not able to accomplish that year, which LeBron was heavily criticized for. But by far the biggest injuries of that season came in the NBA Finals, where Kevin Durant would rupture his Achilles in Game 5 after already missing the first 4 games of this series, as he was trying to rush back from a calf injury he suffered earlier in the playoffs. And then add insult to injury, no pun intended, in Game 6, Klay Thompson would end up tearing his ACL in a game where he had 30 points prior to the injury. And looking at this game and how Draymond Green had 11 points, 13 assists, and 19 rebounds, how Andre Iguodala turned back the clock and had 22 points, and even how DeMarcus Cousins contributed 12 points off the bench, if Klay Thompson was healthy, this series would have at least gone to a Game 7. And if Klay and KD were healthy for the whole series, this series might have ended in 4 games. But on the contrary, despite all of those injuries, one can also look at Stephen Curry and say that if he played better in Game 6, they may have forced a Game 7 and won at home anyways. In short, injuries suck. Prior to the bubble last year, prior to this year and all of the injuries going on right now, injuries have sucked and have had a major impact on the outcome of almost every single year of almost every single NBA season in its history. It's honestly a factor as to why using accomplishments as a metric to measure greatness is a flawed one, but it's also just human nature to a degree to get hurt and can be argued as just being a part of this game. If you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel, but with that being said, I'm out. Peace.